I've grown up Christian, and then as I became a young adult, learned about our history, and so began to question, okay, as a Christian, what does this mean for me? How do I wrestle with this tension? But working through all of that, and then coming to a place where I think actually my identity as an Indigenous woman and the traditions and the culture, like as we've been reclaiming our culture, that's a big thing that's happening now among my generation and my cousins and younger. There's this reclamation of culture. And like for me, as a Christian, God has really blessed that journey and been like, it's almost been, it's expanded my understanding of God, to be honest, and just how beautiful culture is, how he created culture. He wants it to be celebrated. You know, he created us all so diverse. And as someone who is part of a people group, that I've looked at our history and been like, oh wow, like that stuff was taken away from my family members.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Trinity Talks. My name is Kyla, and this week I am so excited to be sitting down with Rochelle and Linda to mark the National Indigenous Peoples Day, which happens on June 21st here in Canada. And yeah, Linda and Rochelle are just going to talk to us a little bit about how that day and the history of Indigenous people in Canada intersects with our faith and the history of the church in Canada. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for joining me, ladies.
Thank you so much, Kyla.
Yeah. We'll get you to start by introducing yourself. So maybe, Rochelle, do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, thanks for having us today. My name is Rochelle. I have been going to Trinity for about 3 years. Grew up in Canada, live in Mississauga, grew up in Northern Ontario in a place called Sioux Lookout with my mother here, my dad, and my older sister. And yeah, we're going to be chatting about Indigenous Peoples Day a little bit, and so, or in how, I guess, being Indigenous interacts with our faith. And so, yeah, I'm First Nation. I'll let my mom speak a little bit more to that, but we are part of a people group called the Severn Cree. And yeah, so that's the kind of the groundwork for why I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my name's Linda Martin, and as Rochelle said, I'm her mom. And I'm originally from a place called Muskrat Dam. It's an isolated community. I'm married 40 years ago, and since then I haven't been able to live back in the community. Presently, we live just outside Winnipeg, and both my husband and I are doing mission work for 25 years now.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. So my first question, I want to sort of root us in your faith backgrounds. So when did you first learn about Jesus, and what was that sort of faith experience like for you? Do you want to start, Linda?
Okay. I grew up just knowing about God and knowing of God, and God was real to me, and I know that a lot of our history as Indigenous people, many of my people, the Indigenous people, don't struggle with believing in God, and that comes from the experiences we've had with the church and through the residential school system and the colonization. But it was about 20 years ago that I realized that we had that history, that kind of history, about 25 years ago. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. That I began, I knew about it, but I began to really understand the impact that has had on us as a nation.
Sure.
So myself, I've always believed in God, knew of God.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, I mean, I'm just curious, because I know you've shared this with me. Growing up, you would hear your grandmother share stories of God and Jesus and the Bible. And so from a very young age, you heard those stories, right?
Because the way our family was structured. My grandparents are a very big part of our like day-to-day living.
Sure.
Many nights we would go over to sleep over at my grandparents' house and or tent, not house. And so she would tell us stories of Jesus and stories about God as bedtime stories.
Right.
And from there on, like as a 6-7-year-old, you just heard about God.
Right.
In that way. And that became part of the formation or the foundation of my faith. Today.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think, Mom, you can share a bit more maybe later, but your story then of becoming a young woman and meeting God in a new way impacted your life then. And so for me, you and Dad got married, and at the time you got married, you were Christians. You're both Christians. So for me, I grew up in a home then.
Right.
From the get-go was Christian.
Right.
We went to church. I saw you guys reading your Bibles and praying. And so, yeah, I've just grew up in a Christian home. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the beginnings of my journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. Are there ways, Linda, that you think your faith as a child was like different than the way that, Rochelle might have experienced faith as a child? Or were they sort of similar stories, similar ways of thinking about it?
So I think for me, like as Indigenous people of Canada, we were missionized by different denominations.
Right.
In my tribal area, there's about 52 communities. We had the Anglican Church that came to us, came to our villages and brought the message of Jesus to us. And so for me, I think just coming to learn about Jesus from outside was how I began to know of God, understand God. And whereas with Rochelle, it was just she was born into it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely sort of sets a bit of a different tone, right? Is whether this is something that you feel like is really part of you, or if it's something that you're still trying to bring the pieces together, right?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So how has your Indigenous identity shaped your experience or your understanding of faith?
Because of my early introduction to God and understanding of God and knowing about God, it just kind of became a natural progression of my journey. When I came to a hard place in my life as a young woman, it was to God I turned to. And I called out to God, and I really experienced God answering my prayer. And he became real to me. And from there on, it was like a personal commitment that I made.
Right.
But I can't say that to the rest of my Indigenous people in Canada, because a large percentage of my people, probably like 90%, they went through the residential school system.
Yeah.
I have aunts and uncles and first cousins that went to the residential school, and there they experienced the concept of God as being like something that they had to do.
Right.
Like there were ritual prayers that they had to do. Even the Lord's Prayer was something. It was a ritual prayer that they were asked to do in order to pray.
Right.
So it was more like a legalistic or a system in some ways that was brought the concept of God or the reality of God. And so as part of the reaction to that pain, to that trauma in the residential schools, Christianity and the concept and God is one of the things that they said that they're are experiencing as not wanting to be part of their life in the present.
Right.
And I think for me, we work in the field of trauma. And one of the things that we talk about or teach the people that we work with is that one of the initial impacts of trauma is to have a all or nothing thinking.
Right.
Which is like, for example, for my people, coming away from a traumatic experience, having maybe been in a residential school for 7 years, and having experienced emotional abuse, physical abuse, and spiritual abuse. Many of them came away not wanting to be part of that because it was hurtful to them. So trauma, one of the reactions from trauma is that all or nothing thinking, that all churches are bad.
Right.
And part of our healing needs to be to come to a place where we recognize that not all churches are bad. There's some really good churches.
Yeah.
And the same idea is to being in a relationship or getting to know non-Indigenous people. I'm married to a non-Indigenous man. And so my healing in that journey with another people group, even though the non-Indigenous people were our colonizers and are the settlers, and a lot of pain has come from that even to this day. For me, part of my healing has been to learn to understand that there are some really good non-Indigenous people.
Right.
And some really non-Indigenous people that still hurt you today.
Sure. Yeah.
And I see that today, even in the political world.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting for you to sort of draw out, what your personal experience has been, but also what the experience of Indigenous people in general has been, right? And sort of recognizing that you had this really important moment where you know God sort of more intimately, and you know God as someone who saves and heals. But yeah, against this backdrop of Indigenous people's experience in general, which has been, as you said, sort of more legalistic or painful at times, right? So it's recognizing all of these different pieces are true at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And or when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to see beyond the pain that you're going through.
Yeah.
And I see that still today with my people group. We are still in that place of in the middle of that pain. And a lot of it too is like we are just learning right now to find our voices and to begin to name the things that have happened to us, because for so many years, hundreds of years actually, we were silenced.
Right.
The colonization had a systemic approach, the way they took away our culture, our children, our families. And it's really, when there's a systemic assimilation, it's really hard to see it happen.
Yeah.
Because it happens over generations. So part of my journey has been learning to understand that.
Right.
And for me, what I see happening, like with Rochelle, each generation is going to know more about our history and how we can get better. And we can get stronger.
Yeah.
Each generation gets more educated, has more understanding. And healing will take place as we understand more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to your point there, as I've grown up Christian, and then as I became a young adult, learned about our history, and so began to question, okay, as a Christian, what does this mean for me? How do I wrestle with this tension? But working through all of that, and then coming to a place where I think actually my identity as an Indigenous woman and the traditions and the culture, like as we've been reclaiming our culture, that's a big thing that's happening now among my generation and my cousins and younger. There's this reclamation of culture. And like for me as a Christian, God has really blessed that journey and been like, it's almost been, it's expanded my understanding of God, to be honest, and just how beautiful culture is, how he created culture, he wants it to be celebrated. You know, he created us all so diverse. And as someone who is part of a people group, that I've looked at our history and been like, oh wow, like that stuff was taken away from my family members. Those, even the right to be a parent was taken away, or their culture was taken away, the language was taken away. As we're reclaiming that, I'm like, God says that's good, right? God says that's good to reclaim this, to celebrate it, to see the beauty in it. So there was a time where I had tension between these two identities, but I've come to a place where I've been like, oh, God really blesses that.
Right. Yeah.
And in addition to what Rochelle is saying, I think for me, another thing I struggled with is my sense of identity. Like, who am I?
Yeah.
Because even our the education system at a grade school level, it was all like, I graduated, I finished grade 8 thinking that the social studies, early explorers that I learned in my social studies classes, thinking that was my history.
Right.
Thinking, so part of my journey has been to separate that and recognize, no, that's not my history.
Right.
But what is my history? I didn't have history. So part of my journey has been to recognize the impact that all that has had on us, on me individually, like the sense of oppression, being an oppressed people, and having shame, as a shame that tells you don't have a place in society.
Yeah.
Shame that says you're invisible. Shame that says you don't have anything important to say.
Right.
In that journey of oppression and the experience of shame is when I began to understand too that no, it is God who's created me and who I am as an Indigenous woman.
Yeah.
And Genesis 1:26-27 talks about that God created us as male and female. And so once I could begin to understand that, I too began to see the beauty of different nationalities, different people groups, that we all represent something of who God is.
Yeah.
Like the whole world. And that doesn't even capture who God is.
Yeah.
But we see the beauty of all different nationalities, and all of us reflect something of who God is.
Yeah.
And I just see that as beautiful. And that includes me and my nation, that we have something to bring, that we have something that we reflect of who God is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. It's interesting to sort of hear you both reflect on a sort of similar theme of, right, like bringing your Indigenous identity and your Christian identity together. And I'm wondering, in terms of like timelines of that, like has that journey lined up for both of you, or have you been doing that at different times, and how have you supported one another sort of through that?
Do you want me to share first? Okay. I think different timelines. I think, but maybe similar in terms of when it happened to us, but I can't speak for you. So for me, I, again, grew up Christian. And then when I started learning about this, the history of our country and the oppression that my people have experienced, people I love, and then you start hearing about aunts and uncles who went to residential school and these were run by churches, and you start having all these questions, almost like a crisis of faith, where you're like, how could this have happened to people I love, by people I love, and how do I now live in this tension? And so that happened in my late teens, early 20s. Really wrestled with that. And then again, more recently with the discovery of the unmarked graves in Kamloops. And that was 2019? We can fact check that. But when that happened, it honestly like resurged. It was like a resurgence of anger. And another crisis of faith where I said, we knew this happened. I knew this happened, but how could this have happened again? And it was really hard for me to reconcile how these two pieces could go together. And it was hard. Like I couldn't, church was a hard place to be in because there was so much going on in my head. I was looking around and just having really like just a challenging time, saying, how can I step foot in a church with what has happened, because of the church?
Yeah.
And fell into very all or nothing thinking, where I was like, okay, this is all bad. All of it's bad. And, just kind of spiraling. But, the thing that was consistent through it all was my faith in God. And God is faithful. And he was with me through that time and was able to reveal himself through it as good. And that reminder that, okay, God is good. God is faithful. The example of Jesus in the Bible, he's a justice seeker. He looks out for the oppressed. He loves children. Those messages were deeply rooted enough in my heart that I came to a place where I said, okay, God is good. People do bad things sometimes. But even, being part of Trinity, being part of a church community for so many years, I was able to then look at the people I had built relationships with and been like, there are good people. These are good people pursuing reconciliation, pursuing friendship. And then there's also, what's happened in the past was awful. There needs to be justice served, and we're still pursuing that, right, on this journey of reconciliation. But anyways, yes, that's how it kind of unraveled for me.
I think for me, it was in my early 30s, and I did a 3-year BA in social sciences, and it was in my sociology courses that I began to see what's happened in this country. And I remember that one year when I understood what's happened to us as Indigenous people. There was a sense of anger that I had.
For sure, yeah.
And everywhere I looked and I saw non-Indigenous people, there was anger that came. And I was kind of in a conflict because I was already married to a non-Indigenous family.
Wait, I love this man. But he's white.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But I did not get to that place yet where I understood the impact of trauma as having a black and white thinking. I wasn't there yet. It was more like...
But that's a confusing place to be,
right? It
Yeah.
is. It is. There's so much conflict.
Yeah.
And I think many of my people never get past that conflict. Like they understand now we've been hurt by the system, whatever that is.
Yeah.
We've been hurt by the system, and there's so much anger, and I think many of us are still stuck in that. But so for me, it was in my early 30s that I realized what had happened. And there was anger. And I remember one day down in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, we were at the gas station, and I saw these little non-Indigenous kids, and these are innocent children. You felt anger because they represented a nation that hurt us, and during that time also, it was like I was looking at my reality, the world in like split level.
Sure.
It's constantly going back and forth. It's the dissonance of being, I think, an Aboriginal person today. You keep going back and forth in the two worlds, and but I have come to a place of, again, I see the beauty of God's creation of all humanity, that we all represent something beautiful of who God is.
Yeah.
So I'm in my 60s now, so that was a long time ago. I'm talking about,
Yeah. Yeah, when you were talking, Rochelle, about, recognizing that God is faithful, even in the midst of really hard things, like the thing that came to mind for me was like, God is faithful even when God's people aren't faithful.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Like, God is still good even when people do things in the name of God that are not good.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and learning to sort of tease out those differences, I think, is a really important step in the journey.
And that it wasn't God.
Yeah.
It wasn't God that did those things to us. That needs to be part of the discernment in our healing journey. Even though many of those residential schools were run by the government in partnership with the churches, like the Catholic churches, the United Church, and then the Anglican Church. They were in partnership to run these schools. But if you're not on that healing journey or have healed from it, you still believe that those are bad places,
Right.
hurtful places. I lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So, Linda, you do a lot of work with Indigenous Christian leaders and helping them heal from trauma. So, can you just explain to us a little bit, what does that work look like? What are you doing on a sort of regular basis?
So, a lot of it is teaching.
Okay.
And teaching through workshop presentations or guest speakers in different places. And one of the things that we really are excited about is bringing reconciliation between the two people groups. Like I said, my husband's family is from this area. And for the longest time, I could not connect because the two realities, the two worlds, my world and his world, they're just miles apart.
Sure.
But now there's so much that has happened since then. A bridge has been made through reconciliation. Like his home church is one of the churches that sponsor us now. And actually there's a team from there that's going to my home community to do a summer camp. This is going to be their third summer.
Oh, okay.
Third summer. So we do a lot of teaching.
What kind of topics are you teaching on?
It's trauma, loss and grief, and any personal experiences, abuse. We talk about those. And my husband, Rick, he mentors a lot of Indigenous men. Another thing we talk about in healing from trauma is that you need to have a relationship that is consistent over a period of time to help begin to be part of a healing in an Indigenous person. Befriend an Indigenous person. Rick says that if every person in society in Canada befriended an Indigenous person, every one of you guys befriended an Indigenous person, the face of society would look different today. Because there would be so much understanding. It creates empathy when you get to know an Indigenous person. There's empathy that begins to happen, and you just begin to have a heart for my people. And I want things to change. So, and then, so teaching on abuse issues, one of the models that we use in our presentations is that we have 4 stages that we talked about. First stage is what we call reactionary stage. And at this stage, it's more like you reacting to the pain that you've carried. It doesn't matter how far back, 20 years, 30 years, maybe you were abused. However, and there's a lot of anger. And to cope with that, there's a lot of addiction and a lot of depression and suicide. And second stage is understand what happened to you. Begin to name what happened. What emotions do you still carry? Anger, shame, anxiety. And then third is beginning to know how you can move on. And when you get to this stage, you have a heart for other people. Your heart begins to heal and open up for other people rather than being so focused on the present. My pain, and just getting through each day-to-day reaction to life. You're not even living in some ways. And then the fourth stage is you're at the place where you believe, you are created in the image of God, but we live in a fallen world. And people will still disappoint you. People will abandon you. People will hurt you. But that doesn't change who God is. God is still God. And that's who we need to believe, because his promises is one of his promises that is long-standing right from the Old Testament to the New Testament to this day is that I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Yeah.
For me, that's one of the promises that anchors me. I get that's one of my anchors, that he will never leave us nor forsake me. That's his promise.
Yeah.
Right from the Old Testament, still say the same
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So that kind of teaching,
Yeah. Oh, that's
we
great.
bring to my people. Yeah.
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 And how do you incorporate like faith or spirituality into those teachings?
It's we just basically outright call it like biblical counseling,
Okay.
biblical presentations,
Yeah,
but I do use other like approaches, theories, other ways of counseling, because
Sure.
anytime there's pain or trauma that happens to us, I believe that we're affected holistically.
Sure. Yeah.
The way our thinking process gets affected, our emotional capacity is affected, our spirit and our body.
Yeah.
Our pain, our body carries our pain, trauma. We
yeah.
carry our trauma in our bodies. So healing needs to be holistic as
Sure.
well
Yeah.
to address the 4 areas. So in those places, I use different models or theories, however I see that fits to the needs of my people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think that it's important for Canadian Christians specifically to sort of better understand Indigenous people in Canada and Indigenous history?
For better relationships, we have to learn to get along. And to recognize there's 2 people groups in this country that we call Canada. The country that we call Canada.
Yes.
Canada on Turtle Island.
Yes.
What do you mean by 2 people groups? Because
Non-Indigenous and Indigenous.
Okay, I see. Okay, I was like, because Canada has so many people groups, but I see what you're saying. Like when you categorize them,
and Indigenous.
I see. Yeah.
We need to get along. There's so much conflict right now
Yeah.
between the 2, and get to know each other. Because when we get to know each other, there's empathy, and that changes the way we see each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think for me, something that I'm just very passionate about is, like, if we're calling ourselves Christians, and if we're being truly what God and Jesus called us to be, was to love our neighbor, to be compassionate, to be merciful, to speak up for the oppressed, to seek justice, all that stuff, then this is part of that calling, right? To recognize what has happened recently in our recent history as Canadians, and say, okay, maybe I didn't personally play a part in this,
Right.
but if I'm calling myself Christian, if I'm calling myself a Christian, I need to understand the weight that carries
Right.
for Indigenous people and the harm that has been caused by a group that I'm a part of, even if I didn't do it personally.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a big journey for people to go on.
Sure.
And I think there can be a lot of shame and guilt when you start that journey. And I mean, my hope is, even as I have conversations with friends or people or you, like the church, my hope is that people don't feel guilt and shame. I think we should feel deep sadness and deep grief about what's happened.
Sure.
But to be reminded that, yes, this is a high calling. As Canadians and Christians, we should be pursuing reconciliation. And that there's hope. There's a lot of hope in the God we believe in. He, the message of the gospel is one of reconciliation and hope and healing and death to life. So God is big enough to heal this broken relationship. Are you willing to go on it and to also bring healing to a people group that is hurting, and people are still hurting from it? They don't trust the church. They don't trust the title Christian. So, I just want Canadian Christians to know that there is hope, but to start that journey, whether it's by reading one story about, you know, a residential school survivor, and understanding that the impact that had on that child who's now an elder in our community, right?
Right.
Start that journey of empathy and understanding.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I just make an additional comment? Another thing that's happened to my people group is that, so healing from trauma, you need a context. You need a context where that's very important to heal in a good way from a traumatic experience. But we, as Indigenous people today, many times we don't have the family context because of so many things. Like we have the intergenerational trauma from residential schools. And one of the main things that we lost from that experience is good parenting skills.
Right.
Learning, having good families. So to heal from trauma, you need a good family setting, good support, good cultural context, you know, traditions that bring support to as you journey in your pain. Traditions and customs, whatever they are, we don't even have that. We don't have that. So that's another challenge we have as we're trying to heal from years of traumatic experiences. But I think what I wanted to say is that this is one of the ways that the church could bring support to us, you know, by being that community for us.
Right.
Church community, whether having, do you call them life groups?
Yeah, the small groups that we have.
Yes. Those kinds of contexts, like places of support.
Yeah.
Because we don't have those.
Yeah.
And I always encourage that in our workshops. When we invited by churches, and I often encourage them, maybe it's you as a church that needs to start grief support groups, addiction support groups.
Right.
Because we need that.
Yeah. Yeah, just some of those really practical resources,
practical
right?
things we can do.
Yeah. And the ways that we just like do all of life together.
Yes.
Right? Like in the life groups, we get to study the Bible, but we also share meals together, and we help each other through the hard times, and we celebrate together, and just doing all of those things and providing a kind of family. Yeah, that's super important for sure. So if folks are listening and they're sort of intrigued and saying, okay, now what? I want to learn more. What are some things that you might recommend?
Really practically, one of the books I always recommend is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And it's by author Bob Joseph. He has a follow-up book called Indigenous Relations. And I actually can't find my other copy. I was trying to find it this morning. This is the sequel, but the first one is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And it's very reader friendly. And if you want to get the big picture of this journey that Indigenous people have been on in our country and why they are where they are today, I really recommend that, because the Indian Act impacted so much about our people and how they function. And of course, it goes back to colonization. So there's lots of good books. First Nations 101 I have there. Unsettling Truths. Unsettling Truth is another good one, more about the doctrine of discovery. And then, Mom, you wanted to speak to a little more like personal stories. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I was, I think for me, what I would like to say to the people is that be interested in us and our stories. There's so many books out there right now in different bookstores. People writing their biographies. And actually, as part of my healing over the last 40 years, you know, that's how that was one of the things I did as part of my healing, is read these stories about other Indigenous people, how they began to find healing, it helped me understand, like reading biographies will help you understand what it's like inside that Indigenous person to go through that.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll bring more empathy, understanding. So biographies of writers, like you can go to I think any Indigo store or
Google.
there's
Type in, you'll get a big
there's
list.
sections. So start small, and also just being open and interested. I often say about Rochelle and her family, her boys. On Every Child Matters? She has her son is dressed in these T-shirts, and off they go to school. And I often say, in that small way, and as part of who you are, how you live out your life, you're sending a message that this is part of our history, and in Canada.
Yeah.
And it's real. It's a reality, you know, and it will affect us. And part of what we learned in history classes and our studies is that it's the people that have the victory over the land or over country that get to tell their story.
Right.
But the one that has been defeated, they don't get a chance to tell their story.
Right.
And I see ourselves as a nation that it's that people group that never got to tell the story, their side of the story. And we are just finally starting to do that.
Yeah.
And so I would say, believe our stories.
Yeah.
Believe our stories that it did happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I ask.
Yeah, no, that's really good because you said earlier that your husband said if every sort of non-Indigenous person in Canada had an Indigenous friend, how that would sort of change things, and I think that's a really good point, a really good place to start. But for folks who feel really intimidated by that, I think some of these biographies are an equally good place to start. Yeah.
Well, and I think because I was saying to you earlier, like it's like be a friend, but to who? Like where are the Indigenous people? When you live in a place like, I found this when I moved down here to Toronto, I was like, we're so diverse, which is beautiful. But I'm like, I don't know I don't see any Indigenous people. Unless maybe you go downtown Toronto, like there are, you might be able to tell, but, they're on the reserves typically. And if they're not, they're very integrated into, they just blend in a little bit.
Sure.
And how do we even cross that bridge to friendship? Like you can't just walk on the street and be like, hey, let's be friends now.
Can I be your friend?
Like there's just not a large population of Indigenous people in our communities. And so I was just saying to you before that like picking up a biography saying, okay, maybe I can't attain that in-person connection right now, but I'm going to read a story about someone and I'm going to believe it. And I really believe it will impact you in a big way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, ladies. This has been a really good conversation. I so appreciate like your honesty and your vulnerability, because I know sharing parts of yourself like this can be a really hard step, but I think also something that is so important for us to hear and to get to learn from and get your perspective. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Kyla. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And for those who are listening, thank you for sticking with us and taking this time to sort of reflect. I hope that in whatever you have heard, that you are able to take a piece of this and bring some healing forward, whether you need that healing for yourself or healing in our relationships with Indigenous folks in this country. And we'll see you again next week.